everyone. My name is Peter Tabbins. I'm the MPP for Toronto-Danforth. I'm very pleased this morning to be here with Dresden CARED and Walpole Island First Nation, who will be speaking to the decision by the Ford government to remove the environmental assessment for the landfill proposed near Dresden. I support the position that's being taken, and I'm very pleased that they're here today to talk about the difficulties they face and the problems that Ontario has to overcome. And with that, I turn it over to them.
Thank you, Peter. Before we launch into this, we wish to acknowledge that Ontario's legislative building sits on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The area of Queen's Park was an important gathering place for First Nations, and this land was once home to other distinct Indigenous groups, including the Huron and the Haudenosaunee. My name is Catherine Shaler. I'm the former ONDP candidate for Lambton-Kent Middlesex, in which Dresden is right in the center. I'd like to also introduce Stefan Premdas behind me, chair of Dresden CARED, Stephen Peacock, also with Dresden CARED, Chief Leela Thomas, Chief of Walpole Island First Nation, Bequeshwanong Territory, Larissa Reitman is here somewhere. She is the youth counselor from Walpole First Nation, and Amy White is another counselor here. And I'm sorry I don't know the names of everybody else, but we have a good contingent here from Walpole Island First Nation. We're here today to raise awareness throughout Ontario of the cynical power grab that is Bill 5, and in particular the inclusion of an exemption granted York 1 for a full environmental assessment of their proposal to vastly expand a small dormant tile yard and wood ash disposal site into a 6,000-ton per day landfill and construction recycling operation located less than a kilometer from the town of Dresden and in close proximity to the Sydenham River. This proposal first came to light before the February 2024 by-election in Lambton-Kent Middlesex, a largely agriculture-based conservative riding in southwest Ontario, which resulted in the election of PC Steve Pinsonneau, who told voters he was against the dump proposal but counseled them to, quote, have faith in the system. Just before Election Day, just as Mr. Pinsonneau predicted, the Environment Minister announced that due to concerns expressed by the community, she would require a full environmental assessment. Now, Bill 5 removes that requirement and thereby also removes the requirement under an EA of consulting with First Nations and even with municipalities and other organizations. This is unnecessary overreach. This is wrong. The citizens group that has led Dresden's protest against this proposal from day one is Dresden CARED, which stands for Citizens Against Reckless Environmental Disposal. Stefan Premdas, the chair of Dresden CARED's board, will speak next. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Peter, for inviting us as your guests. Thank you, Chief Leela, for coming along. I'm here today bringing the voice of our community, a historically significant community and world-renowned as the home of what we formerly call Uncle Tom's Cabin, but correctly named Josiah Henson. He was an abolitionist and a pioneer that has been a pivotal part of our community's history, along with our First Nations history. Our community of Dresden and surrounding areas is absolutely outraged and betrayed by the Ford governments and our own Lambton-Kent Middlesex Steve Pinsonneau for attempting to fast-track the York 1 landfill expansion north of our town under Bill 5, protecting Ontario by unleashing the Economic Act 2025. The province is looking to reverse its decision and placing a comprehensive environmental assessment on the project, an action that all of us across Sarnia, Lambton-Kent, Middlesex, and Chatham-Kent opposes vehemently. A year ago, on February 24th, the first day of Black History Month, our local residents accidentally discovered this proposal, and neither the community of Chatham-Kent nor Bequeshwanong territories were consulted. Since that time, we've worked hand in hand with the Ministry of the Environment staff to gain thousands and thousands of pages of documents. And in York One's own words, it's a landfill reactivation, not an expansion. As outlined in the Environmental Registry of Ontario's website, York One has requested a change in service area, a change in materials to be accepted on the site. The ministry staff lists no less than 5 separate ECAs and EPA compliances needed, including emphasizing that York One would need a comprehensive environmental assessment. The MECP stated in their letter to York One in October of 2022, a year and a half before they put in their application, that they were not believing the words on the page, and they had requested that York One do another geological stability test, and advising them that they need to comply with it under Ontario Regulation 232/98. I hope the MPPs in this building are taking note and will check this out. The geological instability that the Ministry of the Environment staff speaks about, coupled with York One's reports that state the site has naturally occurring gases in levels exceeding the lower explosive thresholds, and this explosive gas layer running along the Kettle Point Aquifer also runs under the town of Dresden. This is of grave concern to more than 3,000 people. We remembered what happened at Wheatley in 2021 when Wheatley exploded. It was a really dark day for our community. Thankfully, no one was hurt, just a couple homes exploded because of gas in water wells in the aquifer. The ministry staff has repeatedly reaffirmed in communications with York One their strong opposition and their position that this project undergoes extensive evaluations. Other concerns regarding the site's designation as a wetland and a flood zone, which under the Ontario Landfill regulation is not a suitable location. You can imagine the community's surprise a year and a half later when York One told us they did not need the approvals from the Ministry of the Environment or any approvals from the municipality of Chatham-Kent. Our community of Dresden acted quickly, and we requested that Bill 197 be used as the mechanism to stop the reactivation of this project. Both our municipalities within 2.5 kilometers of Don Euphemia and Chatham-Kent would be greatly affected. Both councils voted unanimously to oppose this project, meeting the criteria for Bill 197. Yet the Premier refused to let us use this mechanism. Our municipalities cited issues like a lack of ability to process the leachate, but also discussed the fact that 700 trucks daily coming through our towns, either from the 401 or the 402, would have to pass by 2 major municipal landfills that York One already has contracts to deposit waste in, and both those landfills at Ridge and Watford has room for another 20 to 50 years in the cells they currently have, with room to expand even further. York One's documents list the site last use as the Chatham-Kent's police, gun range, and bomb range, prime agricultural farmland, and a wood disposal chipping site. All of these are acceptable uses under the landfill regulations for a property that was closed down 43 years ago. Additionally, we asked the Premier to revoke the dormant landfill license like he'd done before in 2018 with the Edinburgh 19 landfill, which had an approved EA, but the Premier buckled to public pressure. He's not apparently doing that with this landfill with greater dangers. Our ERO comments and election pressure during the by-election got us an EA, not the Conservative candidate Steve Pinsonneau. Our advocacy group, Dresden CARED, handed Steve Pinsonneau all the files that we had gathered from the Ministry of the Environment to enable him, when he came to Queen's Park, to have a conversation with the Premier. Because when asked, the Premier said he did not know about the project, but if the people didn't want it, he would listen. Well, here we are today. The Premier obviously is not listening, and we as a community have no voice. Our community has sent us here today to let you know that this will impact not just our historical community and the archaeology of the First Nations, which is so rich around the Sydenham and Molly's Creek, but more than 88 species at risk just in our little town of Dresden. It will affect the nearby Sydenham River, which runs through our town and is a federally protected river under the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries for the little perch and pickerel and red gar that spawn there, that go down through the Great Lakes waterways and ends up on all of our tables. It will also affect our agriculture food sector, our international soybean contracts with China. I don't think the Premier realizes that Jackson Seeds, based in our town of Dresden, and the property right behind this proposed landfill is where the very first organic soybeans were ever grown in Canada, and Jackson Seeds holds the very first contract internationally with China from back in the 1980s. Additionally, we have in our town a ConAgra food processing plant, which will be greatly affected by this landfill project. Right now, I'd like to ask everyone watching across Ontario, who among you would like to eat vegetables grown next to a landfill that's processing asbestos? Who wants to drink water from a water well when someone has erected a landfill on top of it? Or eat the fish from a river where this company's last project in Birthbridge, Toronto, that was recently fined for false and misleading information and other illegal dumping, that EA shows 4 pages of water-soluble cancer-causing chemicals. Who among you wants to drink that water or eat the fish out of that river or that lake, knowing that there will be toxic bioaccumulation within the fish in our waterways? But more importantly, who here has ever said to themselves, I'm willing to move to the front doors of an 80-meter-high, stinky landfill where the ministry has already warned that the ground cover would prevent our aquifer from recharging and could potentially, based on the current geology, trigger a collapse. A collapse that would ignite the already explosive gases under our town. Our community is outraged and confused as to how this company got its project singled out to be written in an omnibus bill that takes away our voices and places us in extreme danger. The people in our town and surrounding areas, not too far from where North America's largest underground gas storage facility is, where they're pumping 5 billion cubic meters of natural gas into the ground every day that feeds southwestern Ontario. Everyone is scared that another Wheatley will happen in our town and have a greater catastrophic effect that not only takes out the northern neighboring communities, but takes out the power grid for all of southwestern Ontario. So again, we will ask the Premier, will he revoke the dormant landfill license that is 43 years outdated? Will he withdraw Dresden from Bill 5? And if not, will he at least live up to his election promises and his words that this project would go through the comprehensive environmental assessment that would flush out all the dangers in the documents, the thousands of pages of documents that we handed to Steve Pinsoneau? We call upon this government to halt the additional constitutional overreach in Bill 5 that takes away the voices of our First Nations community, of which Dresden is part of the unceded territories of the Brecka-Jawong territories and the First Nations of Walpole. With that, I will hand the speaker over to the Honourable Chief Leela. Miigwech.
Bonjour everyone. Makwana da Tashinkwa Dishnakaz Bakajana Dunjaba Makwa Dodem. I'm Ogimkwa Chief Leela Thomas from Bakajana Walpole Island First Nation. And I'm here today with my fellow councillors and my community members to speak out about the proposed Omnibus Bill 5, Protect Ontario by Unleashing Our Economy Act 2025. When I hear the word protect, I think of shielding something or someone from harm, danger, or destruction. This is especially true for those who cannot defend for themselves. Since time immemorial, First Nations have been protectors of our rights, our sovereignty, our environment, and our way of life. Our ancestors understood that everything is connected and has a purpose. They knew that a healthy environment is the foundation for human survival, well-being, and even long-term economic stability. Our economy is not separate from nature. It depends on clean air, drinkable water, fertile soil, and a stable climate. If we destroy the ecosystems we rely on, we destroy the very foundation of our food systems, industries, and communities. Cleaning up environmental damage is far more expensive financially and socially than preventing it. So I ask, why is this government pushing aside environmental assessment requirements for projects that threaten the natural world? Why is it bypassing the Endangered Species Act when we know that biodiversity loss increases the risk of pandemics, viruses, bacteria, and pollution that makes people sick? What kind of economic growth is the government promoting if it makes people ill in the process? This bill is being justified under the guise of economic urgency, claiming the need to fight terrorists and boost development through special economic zones. But let's be clear, this bill undermines environmental protections, existing laws and regulations, and the health and safety of all Ontarians. It prioritizes short-term profit for a few at the cost of long-term well-being for everyone. Protecting the environment is not anti-business. It's pro-survival. This bill also represents a direct violation of First Nations rights. It lacks any meaningful commitment to free, prior, and informed consent. It actively excludes First Nations from oversight and decision-making process that affect our lands, our waters, and our livelihoods. It's a violation of our constitutional rights. Consider the proposed expansion of the Dresden Landfill. The current owners and their subsidiaries acquired the property in 2022, yet they did not file a proposal with the Ontario Ministry of the Environment until January 2024. The local municipality and community have voted against it. Under current law, Bill 197, passed by this very government, an environmental assessment is required. But now, through this Bill 5, the government is trying to circumvent this by reclassifying dormant landfills as pre-approved waste disposal sites, even if no assessment was ever conducted. In Dresden's case, the site was never properly zoned for waste disposal. The previous owners were fined for environmental violations, including leachate contamination, and operated illegally as a waste site and even as a gun and bombing range. This land has a long layered history: a clay tile yard in the 1800s, a garbage incinerator ash dump in the 1970s, and since 1997, it has been zoned agricultural industrial extractive. No comprehensive environment assessment has ever been done at this site, yet there is documented evidence of contamination and leachates entering the groundwater and aquifers, affecting Molly's Creek, the Sitting Hen River, the Snai River, and ultimately Lake St. Clair and the Great Lakes. This poses a serious threat to the health of our environment, our people, our hunting and fishing rights, our species at risk, and our very survival. Water is life, and we all depend on it. And when the water is polluted, we ourselves fall ill to that. We are putting ourselves all at danger. On April 17th, we received a letter from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks informing us that they were proposing to remove environment assessment requirements for the York 1 proposal. We met with them, and they were told that strong provincial oversight would be in place. To me, I left that meeting feeling like they did not come to us in good faith. Because how can the ministry claim to protect Ontario's air, land, water, and species while at the same time removing the very tools required to do so? Even more troubling, they implied that they were not obligated to seek free, prior, and informed consent from First Nations. Again, this is our constitutional right, and yet this government continues to ignore it. We were also told that archaeological assessments may be removed. Dresden sits on the land of the Anishinaabe people. There are known archaeological sites here, evidence of our ancestors and our culture. Disregarding this is not only deeply disrespectful, it flies in the face of the 93 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So 94. Dresden is also central to Black history and civil rights in Canada. It has a legacy of protecting freedom and dignity, of standing up against injustice. Today, Dresden CARES continues that fight to protect health, land, livelihoods, and rights, both First Nation and non-First Nations alike. This site is also located within a wetland, an ecologically sensitive area that plays a critical role in flood mitigation, water filtration, and wildlife habitat. Developing a landfill in a wetland threatens not only local biodiversity, but violates the spirit and intent of Ontario's environmental protection commitments. Moreover, the site is just hundreds of meters from homes, business, and schools, clearly violating Ontario's landfill standards, which establish required setback distances from sensitive land uses. I visited Dresden the other day, where the proposed site is, and literally right across the street is a home right in front. There's homes to my right, there's homes to my left. And they're saying it's going to be open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, with 700 trucks coming through, 6,000 tons of waste a day. That's equivalent to 500 school buses a day. And that's going to have serious impacts for not only Dresden, but the community all around and their sensitive aquifers. So the concerns from Dresden CARES is legitimate and disturbing, and it's frightful. And finally, the proposed landfill would directly violate provisions under the Renewable Energy Act, which identifies wetlands and water systems as key areas to be preserved in support of climate mitigation and sustainable development. What message is the government sending when it is willing to trade away clean water, community safety, and climate resilience for the convenience of avoiding proper review and consent? This proposal doesn't threaten the environment and threatens people, laws, First Nations rights and sovereignty, and the credibility of Ontario's commitment to climate and environmental responsibility and, in fact, economic growth. So calls to action to this government and to all Ontarians, I say this: we need to protect ourselves, our families, your neighbors, the environment, the species at risk, our economy, Dresden, Walpole Island First Nation, our First Nations rights and sovereignty, our water, it's the most precious thing of all. We need to protect ourselves from corporate greed, and we ask that you reject Omnibus Bill 5 in its entirety. Miigwech.
Do we have time for one more speaker? No?
Yep.
Oh, we can?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to introduce Larissa Reitman, who is the youth counselor from Walpole Island First Nation, to give us a youth perspective. Thank you.
Buju Kinawea, Dishakaz Larissa Reitman, Bekejunong Dunjaba. Hello, everyone. My name is Larissa Reitman, and I'm here with the Bekejunong Youth Council. And I would like to say that we firmly stand here together against the proposed landfill in Dresden and the damage that it represents, not just to the land, but to our rights, our future, and our responsibility as caretakers of this earth. We as Anishinaabe youth are standing up because we know that decisions made today will impact generations to come. We carry the teachings of our ancestors who have always lived in balance with the land. And this landfill threatens that balance. It puts our water, our soil, our land, and our future at risk. Last year, as you've heard, a full environmental assessment was supposed to take place, a basic step to ensure transparency, accountability, and safety. But Bill 5 reversed that. It stripped away the requirement for a full environmental review. And that's not just a bad decision, it's a dangerous one, and it sets precedents. Bill 5 undermines environmental protection, ignores community voices, and pushes through harmful development without proper oversight. It's a step backward for both environmental protection and First Nation rights. But we're not just protesting a landfill. We are protesting a system that continues to ignore our voices and violate our rights. Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution affirms and recognizes the rights of our people. It includes the duty to consult First Nations on decisions that impact our lands and our way of life. If this landfill project moves forward without that consultation, it's not just wrong, it's unconstitutional. And we're not only standing here to say no to development, we're standing here to say yes to responsibility, to say yes to respect, and yes to a future where our voices lead the way in protecting our territories. We are the next generation, and we will not be silent on decisions that affect us. Miigwech.
Thank you. Thank you all for those of you who have come or who are tuning in. We have press releases and fulsome documentation to distribute. And I thank you all. Bye-bye. Oh, are there questions?
Yeah, hi, I'm Charlie Pinkerton from the Trillium. Hello, Charlie. Sorry about that rattling, that doesn't usually happen, but speaking of a dump, am I right? No, that's a joke. We reported on Friday about the history of connections and donations from the owners, their executives, etc., to the PC party and with the Premier. The Premier was asked about this today, and he said he doesn't know who the owners are, so I'm just wondering what any of you might make of that.
I'm going to let Stefan answer that one.
Do you know, last year, the Premier in the by-election, which Catherine was running in, stood in front of the media and said that his donors were backing the two candidates running in the by-election last year. And so last year, we knew exactly who was donating to the Ford campaign, and he was donating to the current MPP who has been silent on this topic from Lambton Kent Middlesex. In the press packet I'm going to be handing out, I will be sharing some of those files that shows some of the behavior pattern for false and misleading information. And if the Premier thinks that ignorance is a defense, no, he's the wrong person to be leading our province. There are court cases where the Supreme Court of Canada have made certain statements about the Gazette's and Burnetti's business practices, calling them shady tactics. That's the Supreme Court of Canada in a court case. Also CRA. So how the person leading our province, guy in charge of the laws, can't get his staff to do some research before he stands out there and makes a public statement saying my donors, that he made an emphatical statement, was financially funding campaigns. So I don't believe the Premier on that one.
Would you be okay with a smaller expansion and
This is not an expansion. This landfill went through, by all standards, the required time for safety measures and went on to a separate use. If this were a new landfill today, there'd be 25 to 30 years of monitoring before it could be repurposed. This company cherry-picked one part of more than 150 years of history that suited their advantage. And they then went on to ignore all advice from the ministry. They've been fined multiple times in their other operations. They deposit 70,000 tons of waste in the Ridge landfill, our municipal landfill, 35 minutes south of me. We also found that they had 4 other companies that they were depositing waste there under. We know for a fact that Ridge has another 20 to 50 years of space. So we're not a NIMBY community. I want to put things into perspective. All of Chatham-Kent, including all industry, produces 55,000 tons of waste a year. York 1 alone is trucking in 20,000 plus more tons just under one contract that our entire region produces. I think we've done our fair share. Ridge Landfill, 35 minutes north of me. Again, York 1 has contracts to deposit waste there. And they're set to become one of the biggest landfills in North America. So we don't have a problem with waste or waste management. We have a problem with the site location.
On that topic, the government's argument, at least, is that they're doing this because of the threat from President Donald Trump and the, well, they've been suggesting that there is a threat to shut off shipments of waste from Ontario to the U.S. entirely. How should they fix that problem, if not in Dresden?
You know, this company came to our town after we accidentally found this. We created flyers, flyed the town, and all of a sudden York 1, who would not consult with anyone, showed up and hosted a meeting 2 days after in the same space we did and told us that they were recycling and everything coming out of their facilities were going to be resold on the secondary market. So I'm having a hard time believing that this is tied to waste. Thank you.